I could tell that something was brewing, like it was going to be bigger than just a hashtag that goes away a day or an hour later. And I had to make the decision about whether I was going to be the voice of whatever this thing was or just let it go out into the ether.
Black folks basically invented the internet, or at least we made it worth visiting. But just like in real life, Black identity is constantly undervalued online. That's why it's so important to affirm, celebrate, canonize, and protect how Black identity plays out both IRL and in online spaces. So what makes the way that we use social media so special? Well, Dream Hampton once tweeted, "I'm gonna let you finish, but Black women basically run Twitter." And she wasn't wrong.
You're listening to AFROPUNK Solution Sessions, where we have the conversations that matter to us, conversations that lead to solutions.
I'm Bridget Todd.
And I'm Eve Jeffcoat.
According to Pew, Black folks account for a huge chunk of Twitter's user base. Think about Black Twitter. The way Black Twitter functions has roots in the Black oral tradition, just online. Professional Black funny person Bartunde Thurston says the way that you interact with your followers on Twitter has roots in the Black tradition of call and response. And the way that hashtags, or as he calls them, Black tags, function on Black Twitter are a digital version of the dozens, which is basically the government name of the kind of back and forth insult you might hear in a barbershop. But it's not just jokes. Black Twitter responds to important conversations like Oscar's So White, the creator of which you'll hear from later. Online, we use roasting to talk about real shit. Meet Evelyn from the internets.
Hey y'all, my name's Evelyn. I am an Austin, Texas-based digital storyteller, currently writing a show called Say It Loud for PBS Digital Studios.
You're like a viral sensation, right? Like you've gone viral.
I just wanted to call in Black to work. You heard what I said. Call in. Black.
After the death of Sandra Bland, her video Calling in Black was viewed by over 100,000 people on YouTube alone. She made that video while she was working as a social media strategist for beauty brands, which she says gave her insight into authentically voicing serious issues that Black women face. Her video was hilarious, but it's also about the death of a Black woman. Evelyn says that one unique aspect about how we tell stories online is that we use humor to unpack and process real shit about Blackness and identity. I caught up with Evelyn at the Girl Trek Stress Protest Summit, so it might get a little bit loud. So something that I love about your work is that you really find a way to use creative work, video, using your voice to bring a voice to really serious issues. And it's funny. How did that come to be?
Because that's how I see the world. Some people write songs. Some people, paint or dance. I crack jokes or I tell stories.
Have you always been someone who used humor to understand the world and to talk about the world?
I feel like, yeah. Because, on one end, humor is like a coping mechanism. And you can use it to deflect. You can use it to, redirect attention away from you or towards you. But you can also use it to communicate with others on something that maybe you don't have in common. You can use humor to bridge age gaps and bridge location gaps. We all can find something to laugh about together, I hope.
You talked about that in your talk on stage at the Girl Trek Stress Protest, that, part of your community, what love looks like is roasting, right? And so sometimes love shows up as making fun of you in a way that's funny, that that you feel loved and supported. Yeah. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, it's just not taking yourself too seriously. It's, bringing you down to earth, knocking you down a couple notches, because a lot of the times in our own lives, everything is like ego. It's like, what's happening to me? What am I doing? What did somebody do to me? But things like roasting and making fun of each other, they can remind you and kind of bring you back down to earth. There's stuff to joke about still. So.
Do you think that's a uniquely Black expression of support?
Definitely. Oh yeah, roasting. I don't know any other culture that roasts, but maybe there is, but I don't know more. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting how Evelyn from the internet brought up documentation, because that's something that I think a lot about. And I think that this topic is really relevant to us as people who are in podcasting. The idea of how important documentation is and how important it is to archive and preserve what we're doing and what that will mean to like future folks and how they'll use our work. And I know how important it is for us to really consider like what kind of role we play in facilitating conversations in this moment and in today's context, but like also how important it is to acknowledge how our podcast will help guide conversations beyond our lifetime. So while I often feel really small in this work and I can get so caught up in just like doing the thing, getting the thing done, sending this in, I can also get caught up in how monumental it feels and how much larger than me it is, and that I'm not just a voice shouting into an empty room, but an echo that can persist for all time. And that's just very important. That is very important, and I can't take that away from what we do.
It is important. I hope that you feel that your work is important in that way, that you're preserving a legacy for what it was like for young Black folks and young Black creatives to live in this particular moment in time. I think that's why conversations like the ones that we're having with Evelyn and the ones that we have with other Black creatives are so important, specifically around people who create online, because the internet can be so ephemeral, especially for people of color. You know, we are building stories and telling stories on platforms that a lot of times we don't own and people that look like us do not own. And so I'm always very aware both of what you're saying, but then also this idea of why it is so important to protect and amplify and elevate our voices, particularly online, because you really don't know. You know, one day the powers that be at Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or wherever you're creating something could decide that it's all over. And then what happens to that voice? You know, we already know that when it comes to folks of color, oftentimes our voices are not amplified in the same way. So I think it's particularly important to make sure that we use our voices and tell our stories in ways that other folks down the line can really see themselves and know that we were there. We've always been here.
Yeah, and I think it's funny too, because it's so easy for us to come up with just amazing ideas and amazing stuff. And it comes so naturally to us that like when we are out with it, when we are putting out stuff on the internet, we're just like, this is what we do. We're good at it and y'all like it because we're good at what we do. And that goes into the forefront in front of like, oh, this is an actual thing that I created that's very important, that holds weight today and will hold weight in the future. So I think that there is an imbalance there as well.
When you're a visible Black woman online, sometimes the lines between real life and what you see on the internet can become a bit blurry, especially when it comes to getting paid for our ideas.
I recommend that everybody remembers that they also use social media. So if someone has 200 followers, I'd be like, do you have $200 from that? You don't. So what makes you think that I do? And so just remembering that we're all using the same platforms. And people are like, I want to make videos. And I'm like, go to youtube.com, make a video. Like, it's not a hard thing to do. We've all just used the tools that exist for everybody and made them into something that we are currently proud of. And being visible is difficult just because people forget that we all work for ourselves. And so when you work for yourself, you don't get compensated. You don't get a paycheck every 2 weeks. You have to say no to a lot of things. So you might be feeling, man, I wish I didn't have XYZ values, or else I would say yes to this really big project. Or what else? Like last year I didn't have health insurance. So these visible people, they often work for themselves, and with that comes a lot of all the onus is on yourself to create the life that people at corporate jobs have come to expect.
It's fascinating, right? I think that part of it is this fantasy that because you have so many followers and because when you make a video, people listen. You know, when you make a video, it's on Poor Harriet, a site that I love. I think it can trick us into thinking that person has it made. And it's easy to forget that Evelyn from the internet is a real person and that Evelyn needs health insurance, Evelyn gets sick, Evelyn needs benefits, Evelyn's car might break down, Evelyn has rent. I think that when you're a Black visible person who exists online, all of those realities can take a back seat because of visibility, I think.
Entertainment is something like we all consume and very few of us pay for it. So like the TV shows that you watch, you have a Netflix subscription or a Hulu subscription. But then when you get to the people who are hyper visible, who are not unionized actors, right? The comedians you watch on Instagram, you didn't pay for that video, but you saw it, a million people saw it and nobody paid for it. Nobody paid for Instagram. So what ends up happening is you use that viewership as proof to a brand and say, hey, if you sponsor me or something, and I show my iPhone and say sponsored by iPhone, then I can guarantee a million people will see it. And then iPhone's like, cool, that's worth XYZ money. And then that's how you kind of cobble together a living. That's how some people decide to cobble together a living. So, yeah.
Well, something about you I find so refreshing is that you're actually I don't know if you are comfortable with the word influencer or creator. You're a creator or an influencer who is very open about your finances. I watched your video on Instagram about how you make it work. And I was like, oh yeah. You may think that because I have so many followers, the internet just sends me a check every month. And you were really open. You were like, I pay for this way. This bill gets paid by this. And I don't think anyone really does that.
And I think that's what adds to the weird veil between people who consume versus people who create online. Because people who consume think, like you said, just a check falls from the sky. So I think if more of us talked about how we do what we do and the money involved or not involved, then it would kind of lift that curtain a little bit.
We'll be right back after the break.
Like Evelyn, April Rain has created several viral hashtags that use humor to get people having real conversations about race and to build movements around them. She created the hashtag #OscarSoWhite, which was used hundreds of thousands of times and sparked the first meaningful shift in inclusion in the film industry in decades. When Spike Lee won his first Oscar for BlacKkKlansman earlier this year, he credited Rain with creating the cultural change that allowed him to win. But April didn't mean to start a movement. She was just jokingly expressing frustration at the lack of black faces in the 2015 Oscars from her couch.
#OscarSoWhite, I would love to tell you that there was a really sexy story, but #OscarSoWhite happened very organically and I was not expecting it. And so then when it happened, I could tell that something was brewing. It was going to be bigger than just a hashtag that goes away a day or an hour later. And I had to make the decision about whether I was going to be the voice of whatever this thing was or just let it go out into the ether.
So when you said you could tell that something was brewing, how could you tell that something was brewing with the #OscarSoWhite hashtag?
Well, in the first 30 days, the #OscarSoWhite hashtag was used over 600,000 times. But even in initially, I said #OscarSoWhite, they asked to touch my hair, and that was it. And then I went on to work. And then people picked it up and were being just as petty and snarky and sarcastic as I was being at the time. So it was #OscarSoWhite, they wear Birkenstocks in the wintertime. #OscarSoWhite, they have a perfect credit score. You get the idea, right? And so I was like, okay, but 2 or 3 days later, I saw the media start to pick up on it, and they're like, oh, hey, it is actually a thing, that there aren't any people of color nominated for any of the acting categories, which actually means 20 slots. And so then it sort of became my responsibility to feed the information. And first I had to figure out how white were the Oscars. It turns out snow white, just blindingly white. And so I had to do my research again, starting from zero. And then it was, okay, what do you need to do to sustain this? This is an actual thing. People are still talking about it days later, talking about the lack of diversity. Initially, just with respect to the Oscars, and then it morphed into, the entire entertainment industry. And in fact, now there are so white hashtags for several different industries, tech, and there's a journalism so white. Somebody made a Brooklyn so white at one point. And so I had to figure out how I could sustain the moment and turn it into a movement, and which meant that I needed to write. so that I could explain exactly what I was talking about, because Oscar So White, They Asked to Touch My Hair doesn't say, hey, we really need to talk about the lack of inclusion both in front of, behind the camera, not just on stage, but also screen and film, right? You can't get that from like 6 words. And I needed to do interviews and put myself out there in a public space in which I had not been previously.
Like Evelyn, being a Black woman online sometimes means putting up with boundaries being blurred. People online expect April to educate them, and sometimes people can just be assholes.
There are times when I just want to drag someone for filth, and that's my personal entertainment, so that happens. There are also times when I respond to people to educate. And sometimes it's not to educate them, the people who are lashing out at me for whatever reason, but it's about educating the people that I know are watching and listening and reading. Because, and there are different kinds of people. There are people who, just want to get a rise out of you, just want to be heard, or, fluffing their futon in their mama's basement and just need, some kind of interaction with like a human and not the doll sitting next to them.
That is a sad image you just created.
But I mean, come on, is it not accurate? With the Cheeto dust on the chest.
Gosh.
Thank you. But at the same time, there are other people who genuinely want to know more and don't know where to start. The issue I have there is that very often, especially Black women, we are asked to perform unpaid labor for others when Google is still free and accessible. Thank you, net neutrality. Right? So I try to strike that balance with informing and educating people, both the original poster and folks who are just following along for the ride, and also letting people know that if you step to me wrong, you're going to leave with less. Every single time. I will not allow you to disrespect me because I don't want you to do that to another Black woman or woman of color. And so you need to understand that, I'm not here for your amusement or entertainment.
So I have to say, April talking about the ways that she's learned to cope with what it means to be a visible Black woman and all the different stuff that goes into that really hit home. I have been a visible Black woman online for years now, and I've kind of gone through that same progression of how do you strike that balance of educating and informing, but also not giving in to people who just expect or feel entitled to your time at all times. I've had people who I will say something on a podcast and they will demand that I restate my opinion or like argue with them about my opinion on Twitter, in my email. And for a long time, I thought that the way that I was supposed to deal with that as like a woman on the internet was to respond. And so if someone expected me to reply, expected me to, spend time educating them online, I would do it. There was one time where I spent my entire vacation arguing back and forth with some dipshit on Twitter. I didn't get to spend any of it doing anything vacation-y. But that was a long time ago. These days, I think April is really right. And I hope that other visible Black women who are online who feel kind of pulled to explain something when Google is free or explain something that like they should be being paid to explain, for free online. I hope that they do take her advice. April says anyone, even people who don't have a ton of followers or reach, can use social media to shed light on issues that impact our communities.
Most of the campaigns that I have done have been organic. I see something that I want to speak about and I say something. When I created Oscar So White, which is probably, my longest lasting one, I think I had like maybe 8,000 followers, which is not, which is not chump change, but is definitely not the obscene number of followers that I have now, right? But I think part of it is just knowing your stuff and really sounding informed and speaking from a factual and not an emotional basis about something that you feel needs to be changed, right? And so, with No Confederate, with Stop the Fight, with all of them, it's like, hey, this is a problem. Here's the warning sign. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. And what I will say is, I feel like I've always had really engaged followers, and I think that's so much more important than the number, right? That if you've got people who are responding to you, who want to talk about the issues you want to talk about, that's much more important with respect to movement building online than just having a bazillion followers who may or may not be retweeting you and having the conversation and pushing the dialogue forward.
While Black folks and our creative prowess draw clicks online, all too often we aren't seeing any of the cash. Remember Peaches Monroe? She popularized the expression on fleek and didn't see a dime after it was adopted, or stolen, by everyone from Arby's to Bath & Body Works. Law professor KJ Green argues that online and offline, Black public creativity has been rendered public domain in ways that often leave Black creators getting screwed. Now, Black folks are used to having our stuff stolen, but the speed of the internet means our intellectual property, our very jokes, ideas, and our essence as Black folks can be stolen with the quickness. It sucks, right? So what do? What's the solution? We need to recognize the ways that Black folks have been shut out of things like financial literacy and information about intellectual property rights and the laws around things like trademarks and copyrights.
Prince told us all that we need to own our masters, right? Otherwise, the master is owning us. And related to that, I think, is we need to make sure that we are protecting our content. And I always talk about, and this is an intellectual property thing, and I always talk about the young sister who created, On Fleek.
Peaches Monroe.
And Peaches Monroe has yet to see a dime for creating that incredibly viral, meme back when R.I.P. Vine, back when Vine was a thing. But there's a restaurant in New York called Sports on Fleek. Bath & Body Works had a line of products called On Fleek. So they took those two words, that phrase that she popularized, and turned it into something and did not honor her. And so we have to be, to get technical for a little bit, we have to make sure that we are applying for those copyrights and those trademarks, and in some cases those patents, so that we are protecting our own work, so that someone cannot come in as a culture vulture, as we like to say, and steal the work that we've created.
April says that we also need to focus on self-determination. Instead of waiting for a seat at the table, let's build our own damn tables.
I am inspired by the fact that there are a lot of people of color, especially Black actors and actresses, who are creating their own production companies. Michael B. Jordan, Viola Davis, obviously Ava DuVernay, who are saying, we are no longer waiting for a seat at the table. We are creating our own mansion and putting our own table in it. We are going to create the art that we want to see. And I think that's incredibly important. I'm also encouraged by the fact that there are so many additional ways to get your product to market than there were even 10 years ago. With the rise of Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and even YouTube, there are ways for individuals to get their art to their communities without having to go to the huge studios, right? I think about Matthew Cherry, who is a former football player turned filmmaker. His film, he created completely on an iPhone, and it screened at South by Southwest. That's a huge deal. And now here he is. He's got his first short, which is partnering with Angry Birds 2 in theater. He crowdfunded Hair Love, which is his new short. So that meant, it sort of stayed in the community. He had that backing. And he's also working at Monkey Paw Productions with Jordan Peele, right? And so that's just one example of many of people making their own way in the industry, and that's what encourages me. Seeing, kids who are, I saw the other day, there were some African kids who were making some kind of sci-fi flick, and they were just using the materials they had. Like they found I think it was literally a green sheet, right? And then they were turning into all this technological marvels. Franklin Leonard, the founder of the Blacklist, saw that and said, somebody get me in touch with these kids. And now we see that there are all of these J.J. Abrams from Bad Robot Production Company and all these other people are now completely interested and on board and getting these younger brothers, getting their work to the masses. And that's just the power of people taking their own destinies into their hands and also being in the right place at the right time.
We already know Black people are geniuses. We've always had to build something out of nothing. That's what we do. It's in our blood. We can create movements and culture, and we can do it while just joking around from our iPhones on our sofas. But we have to fight to be recognized for the ways that we've shaped culture. Evelyn's dream for Black creators is that one day that we're compensated for the impact that we've had on culture. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you want the world or the landscape for Black digital creators like yourself to look like?
Oh, I would want us to be compensated on par with our global influence.
What does that look like?
That looks like a lot of rich Instagram dudes. You know, like, I see all these guys, and it's women too, but like, I think of like the funny guys on Instagram, and like, they put in work. And like, even if it's not your cup of tea or not your type of humor, like, they are out here. And so, and when things come from the internet and become, they come into the circle of modern vocabulary, kind of like you were saying on Flea and all these things, the Shiggy Challenge, is that what it was called? I wish what the landscape looks like is those people getting compensated comparable to what they're doing for pop culture.
So when it comes to documenting and protecting and compensating from the way Black genius has shaped culture online, April and Evelyn had some really great advice for us. So let's recap. Let me get out my solutions handbook. So what were some of those solutions, Bridget?
Get educated on things like intellectual property and copyright, so we aren't at risk for having our work stolen.
And is there anything else?
Don't be afraid to make use of our own platforms and use what you have. You don't have to have access to a big, flashy studio. You can make a video on your iPhone and upload it to YouTube.
Any other solutions, Bridget?
Let's all talk more openly about compensation involved or not involved in our work. That way we can increase transparency around pay. So let's say that you create something online that you think can turn out to be a real thing. Maybe it's a hashtag that goes viral like April, or a phrase that catches on like Peaches Monroe. Here's some advice from LegalZoom. First of all, you can trademark a hashtag if you can demonstrate that you're providing a product or service to the general public that can be directly associated with that hashtag. But remember, a trademark is different from a copyright. Trademarking a hashtag will not prevent people from using it on social media. It can only stop companies and service providers within the same industry from using your hashtag directly to compete with you. To apply for a copyright, you need to reduce your work into a tangible thing. Think a written down story or a recorded song. Then you can pay a $35 filing fee to submit an online form to the U.S. Copyright Office. You should also consider buying any relevant URLs or domains so that no one else can. But you know what? We aren't lawyers, and you should definitely get advice from actual legal professionals. Luckily, as April mentioned, the Lawyers Committee's Creative Control Initiative can help creators sort out the legal aspects of how to protect their work.
AFROPUNK Solution Sessions is presented by AFROPUNK. Your hosts, writers, and producers are Bridget Todd and Eve Jeffcoat. Executive producers are Jocelyn Cooper and Quan Lateef Hill. Chelsea Stratton is associate producer. Audio engineering and sound design by Audio Mystics. Many, many thanks to our content team leads, Emil Wilbekin and Steven Silos. The Underside of Power is performed by Algiers. Subscribe and download new episodes every Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AFROPUNK.
What does punk mean to you?
Punk means to me, punk is a form of music, punk is an attitude, and punk is a lifestyle. I think punk is about going against the grain and really kind of doing what you want to do the way you want to do it. It's expressing yourself. But it's also kind of like unleashing this inner rage that I think a lot of people have, especially when they don't feel like they're part of the mainstream. So it's really being this outsider and kind of like releasing that like rage of like who you really are and being like unapologetic about it.